Yeah, thank you, Claire. Um, so when I think of populism in Europe today, or maybe we should call it anti-establishmentarianism, which is probably more etymologically correct, even though it's not as sexy, so I'll stick to populism. But so my feelings are ambivalent. On the one hand, it's obviously a good sign. It's a sign of a relatively healthy body pol- body politic, a sign that despite the infinite money and resources that they deployed to brainwash people into getting them to support policies that are clearly against their interests, people are not buying it. So it turns out that there are limits to propaganda. That's a good sign. Um, it's a sign that despite the existence in the West today of, I would say, the most sophisticated propaganda slash censorship machine ever created in human history, you really can't convince people that it's sunny outside when it's actually pissing down with rain. And and again, that's a good thing. So the limits to propaganda. So propaganda can't fully replace reality, and and that's good. But it's not just propaganda. We've witnessed a decades-long attack on the very concept of popular democracy, on the idea that ordinary people should have a say in the management of society and, God forbid, the economy. This is what neoliberalism as a political project has been about. Demobilizing and depoliticizing the democratic process by effectively insulating the decision-making process from any challenges from below, especially on the issues that matter, i.e. the economy and foreign policy, but also by fueling apathy, by getting people to accept that they should be mere spectators to the political game. And I think this has also been a form of psychological warfare in many ways, partly waged by demonstrating time and time again that people can vote for whomever or whatever they want, but this doesn't really matter in the end because the policies are decided elsewhere. And of course, Brexit is the most obvious example, one of the biggest FUs to the democratic principle ever, probably. And of course, part of it is to protect the status quo, obviously. But I think, it's quite clear to me that the aim is also to break people's spirits, to get them to accept that, just accept the fact that we live in an oligarchy, democracy is a scam, just go about your lives and stop, even thinking that you can influence this process because we're much more powerful than you. And yet, despite all this, despite this decades-long political process, they haven't succeeded in fully breaking people's spirits. Yes, of course, there's a lot of disillusionment around, understandably. Evidence, for example, by declining rates of electoral participation and other examples. But the ongoing populist wave shows that a lot of people have not given up on the basic idea of having a say on their collective fate as peoples and countries, as nations. And this is rather exceptional. It's quite incredible, I would say, if we consider, again, the amount of money and resources that were thrown, precisely to stop people from even thinking that this was something that is conceivable. So, this is all very positive in my opinion. At the same time, I think we have to ask ourselves, are the populist parties currently in existence living up to this historic challenge? And at this point, I'm a bit less optimistic. So when I look at the current raft of right populist parties, again, we're using these terms for lack of better terms, but there are some parties on the left, but mainly it's right parties that are leading this wave. What do I see? So I see parties that are giving a voice to popular frustration with issues like immigration, net zero, and woke nonsense. And they should be praised for this. This is good. But is it enough? So to me, anti-wokeism and greater restrictions on immigration are only part of a successful populist strategy or populist program. These concerns are clearly just part of what is fueling support for these parties, but they're not everything. I think in many ways, these concerns are expressions of a deeper, socioeconomic and existential insecurity. They are the expression of a deep-seated frustration at the devastation caused to working class communities by decades of neoliberal economic policies. And unfortunately, when it comes to providing an alternative to the economic status quo, I find most right populist parties wanting. I find many of them wedded to the economic mainstream. I find them wedded to crude forms of economic liberalism, if not outright libertarianism, and crude forms of anti-statism. And in my opinion, this isn't going to cut it, because we need to understand that people yes, they want less immigration and they want less woke bullshit, but they also want higher wages, better jobs, better social security, better welfare, higher pensions. And if that is so, and I think it is, and there's quite a lot of data to back that up, then I think the logical conclusion is that a kind of conservative right approach to cultural issues needs to go hand in hand with a left approach to economics. And I don't see any contradiction there. In fact, I would argue that the kind of social cohesion that conservatives cherish and want can only exist if the state intervenes to prevent the most destructive outcomes of unfettered capitalism, which is what has atomized to a large degree our societies. And I think this is an approach that, this kind of left-right populist synthesis is an approach that potentially could have massive electoral potential. And yet, somewhat, strangely, it's virtually absent in the Western political panorama today, with the notable exception of Sarah Wagenknecht's party in Germany, which is doing incredibly well despite having just been created a few months ago. So maybe that tells us that, she is moving in the right direction. And I think, part of the reason why I think these parties aren't challenging the economic status quo. I mean, there are a number of reasons. It partly has to do with the fact that challenging the economic status quo in Europe today means challenging the institutional straitjacket that prevents any serious challenge to the economic status quo, i.e., obviously the European Union and especially the euro. And this brings me to my second criticism of today's populists, and that is that they're not radical enough, in my opinion, when it comes to challenging the European Union. In fact, that is shocking, in my opinion, that despite the European Union today having become, I would say, more dangerous than ever, especially now that it's becoming sort of an extended arm of NATO, virtually no populist party dares to openly talk of leaving the EU or the euro. This was somewhat different a few years ago. And I think this is tragic. I mean, this basically means that these parties are setting themselves up for defeat, because the European Union has a lot of tools to bring any populist government to heel. And we see that in Italy with Meloni. I think we've partly seen it already with Le Pen, which seems to have already watered down her program before even getting elected. And so, to sum up, I would say, we should cheer the continued rise of populism in Europe and beyond. But I still think there's a lot of work to do if we want to seriously challenge the status quo. Thank you.